All right, welcome to the Mad Genius Thesis.
Thanks for having me.
So in this deep dive, we're tackling a question
Yeah.
that has fascinated thinkers for centuries.
Definitely, yeah.
Is there a connection between creativity and mental illness?
Yeah.
It's a question that has no easy answers.
No.
We've got a stack of your sources here, and it looks like you're particularly interested in Kay Redfield Jamison's Touch with Fire, which really explores this possible link between manic depressive illness and artistic temperament.
Yes, it's a fascinating book.
Ready to dive into some fascinating and sometimes controversial territory?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So,
It's a topic that requires a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
And, as Jamison emphasizes, we're not talking about simple cause and effect. It's more about exploring potential connections,
Right.
overlaps between mood disorders,
Mm-hmm.
like manic depressive illness,
Yeah.
and even milder forms like cyclothymia.
And how these might influence artistic expression.
Right. All right. So let's start with the basics.
Sure.
We've got some highlights marked in Chapter 2.
Yeah.
Endless Night, Fierce Fires, and Tramming Cold, where Jamison really lays out what manic depressive illness, or bipolar disorder as we know it today,
Yes.
is all about.
Yes, that's right.
What are some of the key things that stand out to you from that chapter?
Well, one thing that struck me was how vividly Jamison captures the sheer intensity of both mania and depression.
Right.
It's not just about mood swings. We're talking about extreme states.
Right.
That can be incredibly devastating.
Yeah.
Think of Robert Lowell,
Yeah.
who, during a manic episode, ran through the streets convinced he could stop cars with his outstretched arms.
Wow.
On the flip side, you have the crushing despair of depression,
Right.
the complete loss of energy and interest in life,
Yeah.
as experienced by poets like John Berryman and William Cowper.
Wow. That image of Lowell trying to stop traffic
Mm-hmm.
really paints a picture
Yeah,
of how extreme these states can be.
it really does.
It's definitely not just having a bad day.
Not at all.
And you mentioned cyclothymia.
Yes.
That's one I'm less familiar with.
It's,
How does that fit into the picture?
well, cyclothymia is kind of like a milder form
Right.
of bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
You still experience the highs and lows, but they're not as extreme.
Right.
The psychiatrist Ernst Kretschmer, he described those with cyclothymia as having a soft temperament
Okay.
that swings between cheerfulness and unhappiness.
Interesting.
Some people even experience this in a seasonal rhythm.
Interesting. So it's like a spectrum
Kind of, yeah.
with cyclothymia on one end
Yeah.
and severe manic depressive illness on the other.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
But where does the creativity piece come in?
Right.
How does Jamison start to link these mood disorders with artistic temperament?
Well, she takes us way back, starting with the ancient Greeks.
Okay.
They had this concept of divine madness, a kind of inspiration from the gods, often associated with ecstatic states.
Right.
Remember, many great Greek poets dedicated their work to Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, whose rituals often involved frenzied dances and feasts.
Right. Those Dionysian rituals definitely sound like they had an element of madness to them.
Yeah.
And wasn't Socrates also like a believer in this idea of divine inspiration?
Absolutely. As Plato recounts in Phaedrus,
Yeah.
Socrates believed that madness comes from God.
Right.
And that those touched by it could achieve extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And even Aristotle, a much more grounded thinker, observed that many great thinkers and artists, from Empedocles to Socrates himself, seem to have a melancholic disposition.
So this fascination with the link between madness and creativity
Yes,
isn't just a modern invention. It's been around for centuries.
exactly.
Wow.
Jameson really emphasizes that. But of course, the question is
Yeah.
there any scientific evidence to
Yeah.
back up these intriguing historical anecdotes?
That's a great point. Anecdotes are one thing, but what about modern research?
Yeah.
Does Jamison find any support for this link between mood disorders and creativity?
She dives into a lot of research,
Okay.
acknowledging the challenges in studying something so complex.
Right.
But one study that really stands out is Nancy Andreessen's work with writers
Okay.
at the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Okay.
She found a significantly higher rate of mood disorders, especially bipolar disorder,
Wow.
in these writers and their families
Yeah.
compared to the general population.
Wow. So there might actually be a genetic component to this.
Potentially, yeah.
That's pretty significant.
It is. And she also brings up the idea of assortative mating, which basically means people tend to choose partners who are similar to themselves.
Okay.
So if you have a family that values creativity, they might be more likely to intermarry with other creative individuals
Right.
who themselves may have a higher chance of having mood disorders.
Right. Okay.
This could lead to a concentration of both creativity and mental illness within certain families.
That makes sense. Those traits are getting passed down and
Right.
amplified through generations.
Exactly.
But I have to admit, this whole idea of linking madness and genius is pretty controversial.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, there are tons of creative people who aren't mentally ill, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So,
Wait.
and Jamison acknowledges that.
Okay.
She even cites critics like Harold Nicholson, who argue that many writers are perfectly sane,
Right.
but her point isn't that all artists are mentally ill.
Okay.
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It's about exploring the potential connections,
Yeah.
not saying one causes the other.
Okay, so it's not a simple cause and effect,
Not at all.
but more of a complex interplay.
Exactly. Think of William Blake. There's been endless debate about whether he was mad, a visionary, or both.
Right.
He clearly had intense visions and mood swings.
Right.
But what does that actually mean? Were they signs of mental illness or something else entirely? What do you think?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's easy to romanticize these figures,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that we're talking about real people
Yes.
who experienced real suffering.
Absolutely.
So it's not about glorifying mental illness,
You know.
but rather trying to understand its complexities.
Exactly. And Jamison digs even deeper, looking at specific cognitive and temperamental traits
Okay.
linked to manic depressive illness
Uh-huh.
and how those might affect creativity.
Like what kinds of traits are we talking about?
Well, one fascinating example is combinatory thinking.
Okay.
Imagine a mind buzzing with manic energy, making connections between seemingly unrelated ideas at lightning speed.
Okay.
Jamison uses John Ruskin's analogy of a snake's movement, where its volition acts at the same instant in coils that go contrary ways.
Whoa, that's a powerful image. It really captures that feeling
Yeah.
of a mind racing in all directions at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Olaf Lagerkrantz, in his biography of August Strindberg,
Okay.
describes how the playwright could see connections between the most disparate things,
Okay.
from the patterns on a kingfisher's feathers
Wow.
to the shapes of frost crystals.
That's incredible. It makes you wonder if there's a sweet spot
Yeah.
where that manic energy fuels creativity
Right.
without becoming overwhelming
Yeah.
or destructive.
It's a delicate balance.
Right. And it's not just about like the speed of thought,
It's not.
but also the intensity of emotions.
Yes.
Both the ecstatic highs and crushing lows of manic depressive illness
Right. Yeah.
can be powerful fuel for artistic expression.
Absolutely.
Remember John Berryman's desire to be nearly crucified in his work.
Yes.
He seemed to believe that suffering was essential to his creative process.
He did. Yeah.
It's like that line from Shelley. Most wretched men are cradled into poetry by wrong.
Yeah.
There's this idea that poets learn in suffering what they teach in song.
Exactly.
But I guess it's not just about pain, right?
Right,
It's
right.
about the whole spectrum.
It is.
Heightened emotions.
Yeah, think of Graham Greene, a novelist
Okay.
who himself experienced periods of depression.
Okay.
He described writing as a form of therapy. For some artists, it's a way to process those intense emotions to
Yeah.
give them shape and meaning.
Yeah.
It's not just T-pain, but also the heightened sensitivity and awareness often found in those with mood disorders.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got this potential link between mood disorders and creativity,
Yes.
possibly fueled by genetic factors,
Yeah.
assortative mating, and even specific cognitive and emotional traits.
Right.
But how does this play out in the lives of actual artists?
Well, that's where Jamison's research gets really fascinating.
Okay.
She delves into the biographies of numerous artists and writers, looking for clues to this complex relationship. And one of the things she explores is the influence of seasonal patterns on mood and creativity.
Seasonal pattern.
Yes.
Like how the changing seasons can
Yeah.
affect someone's mood.
Exactly.
I know some people get seasonal affective disorder, but
Right.
how does that tie into creativity?
Well, she discusses how light sensitivity can be a factor for people with manic depressive illness,
Okay.
and how this might be connected to seasonal variations in mood and even productivity.
So some artists might be more creative in spring and summer
Potentially, yeah.
with more daylight,
Yeah,
while others might thrive in fall and winter.
exactly. She contrasts Vincent van Gogh, incredibly productive during spring and summer,
Right.
with Robert Schumann, whose creative peaks were in fall and winter.
Yeah.
They're like opposite ends of the spectrum.
That's so interesting. It makes you wonder if our creative rhythms are somehow tied
Yeah.
to these natural cycles.
It's a fascinating thought.
But I have a question.
Yeah.
What happens to artistic output when mood disorders are treated effectively?
Right.
If someone's pain is alleviated,
Yeah.
does their creativity diminish?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And one that Jamison grapples with throughout the book.
Okay.
It's a real dilemma. She mentions lithium.
Mm-hmm.
A common treatment for bipolar disorder
Right.
can sometimes have side effects,
Mm.
like blunting emotions, which could potentially impact creativity.
Oh, wow. So treatment itself
Yeah.
could hinder artistic output.
It's a possibility.
That's a tough trade-off.
It can be. But it's important to remember that treatment often leads to greater stability and sustained productivity.
Right.
Plus, there are other medications besides lithium,
Right.
some with fewer side effects.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right. But it still raises questions about the potential downsides of treatment, especially as we learn more about the genetic basis of these conditions.
Absolutely. And that's where we get into the ethical considerations that
Yeah.
Jamison raises, particularly around genetic research and the possibility of future treatments that could alter someone's fundamental temperament.
That's definitely something to ponder.
It is.
I'm eager to dive into those ethical questions.
Yeah.
And see what insights Jamison offers.
Me too. But for now,
Okay.
let's take a break.
All right. Sounds good.
Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis.
So before the break, we were discussing this potential link between mood disorders and artistic output,
Right.
and how treating those disorders might actually impact someone's creativity.
Yes.
It really is a paradox, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
On one hand, we want people to get the help they need
Of course.
for their mental health.
Yes.
But we also love this idea of great art emerging from intense, even painful emotional experiences.
It's a tricky balance for sure.
Yeah.
And Jamison doesn't pretend to have easy answers. She takes us through the history of treatment for manic depressive illness,
Okay.
from the early asylums to the introduction of lithium in the mid-20th century. She also explores the lives of artists who struggled with their mental health,
Right.
both with and without treatment,
Right.
and how their creative output was affected.
It makes me think of Sylvia Plath,
Yes.
whose poetry is so raw and powerful, so deeply intertwined with her experiences of depression.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine her work without that element of darkness.
Right.
Do you think her creativity would have been the same if she'd had access to better treatment?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
For some artists like Plath, their mental illness seems so essential to their creative voice that it's impossible to separate the two.
Right.
But for others, treatment can provide stability and clarity,
Okay.
allowing them to create in a more sustained and productive way.
Right.
It's not about erasing their creativity,
Yeah.
but helping them manage their symptoms so they can live a fuller, healthier life, which might still include creating, even if it takes on a different form.
I appreciate that Jamison doesn't shy away from the ethical complexities.
Yeah,
It'd be easy to romanticize this connection,
Right.
but she acknowledges the real suffering involved.
Absolutely.
But she doesn't just focus on artists, right?
No, she
She
doesn't.
branches out into other fields as well.
Yes, she looks at scientists, political leaders, and other eminent individuals
Okay.
who've experienced manic depressive illness,
Right.
which suggests that the potential advantages of this temperament, the heightened energy, the drive, the risk-taking,
Yeah.
might extend beyond the realm of art.
So those same traits that fuel artistic expression could also lead to groundbreaking scientific discoveries
Potentially, yeah.
or bold leadership in politics.
That's exactly what Jamison proposes.
Wow.
She suggests that manic depressive illness might actually provide an evolutionary advantage,
Okay.
not just for artists, but for society as a whole.
That's a really interesting concept.
It is.
It makes you question how we define normal and abnormal.
Yeah.
What if what we consider mental illness
Right.
is really just a variation on the human experience,
Yeah.
one that sometimes leads to extraordinary achievements?
It's a profound question,
Yeah.
and Jamison doesn't offer easy answers.
Right.
She encourages us to approach this topic with nuance and compassion, recognizing both the challenges and the gifts
Right.
of these complex temperaments.
Okay, but let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and look at some of the specific examples Jamison uses to illustrate her points.
Yeah, let's do that.
You've marked a few passages that focus on individual artists.
Uh-huh.
What caught your eye?
Oh, there are so many good ones.
Yeah.
Um.
Well, I was really struck by her analysis of Lord Byron.
Oh, yes, Byron.
He's often seen as the quintessential romantic hero.
He is.
The brooding intensity, the passionate affairs, the tragic end.
Right.
But Jamison goes beyond that surface-level image.
She does.
And really explores the depths of his manic-depressive temperament.
Yes, she digs deep.
Yeah,
Byron is a fascinating case study.
he is.
His life was a whirlwind of highs and lows.
Right.
And those extremes definitely found their way into his poetry.
Yeah.
His biographer, John Cam Hobhouse, described him as having a mind like a volcano full of fire and wealth.
Wow.
He could be incredibly charming and witty one moment
Yeah.
and plunge into despair the next.
And Jamison links those mood swings directly to his creative process.
She does, yeah.
She argues that Byron's manic episodes fueled his incredible productivity,
Right.
allowing him to write at a feverish pace,
Yes.
while his depressive periods infused his work with a sense of melancholy and introspection.
Exactly.
And she points to specific examples in his writing
Right.
where you can see these contrasting moods at play.
Yeah, like take Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, for example.
Okay.
It's filled with passages that capture both the exhilaration of travel and adventure,
Right.
as well as the deep sense of alienation and despair that Byron often felt.
It's like those emotional extremes were the raw material for his art,
Yes.
the clay from which he sculpted his masterpieces.
I like that analogy.
And Byron himself seemed to recognize this connection.
He did.
He once wrote, "The great object of life is sensation, to feel that we exist, even though in pain."
Powerful word.
It seems like he needed those intense emotions to feel truly alive.
It does seem that way.
And those emotions inevitably found their way into his writing.
They
It's
did.
a powerful insight, isn't it?
It is.
And it reminds us that while we might romanticize the tortured artist trope,
Right.
these are real people experiencing real pain.
They are, yeah.
But Byron's not the only example.
No, he's not.
You also highlighted a passage about Robert Schumann, right?
I did, yes.
His music is so full of romantic sensibility,
It is.
with those dramatic shifts in mood and deeply personal expression.
Yeah.
And as you might expect, he also struggled with manic depressive illness throughout his life.
He did.
And Jamison does a great job of tracing the trajectory of his illness alongside his creative output.
She does, yeah.
She notes that his most productive periods often coincided with hypomanic states,
Right.
those periods of heightened energy and creativity
Yeah.
that fall just short of full-blown mania.
Exactly.
And like Byron, Schumann's music reflects those emotional fluctuations.
Absolutely.
You can hear it in the stark contrasts
Yeah.
between his lighthearted and playful pieces
Right.
and his darker, more melancholic compositions.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear those shifts.
It's like listening to the soundtrack of his soul,
It is.
the ebb and flow of his manic depressive temperament, finding expression through music.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, and through these examples,
Yes.
and countless others,
Right.
from Virginia Woolf to Vincent van Gogh to Edgar Allan Poe,
So many.
Jamison paints a nuanced and compelling portrait of this complex relationship.
It's not a simple equation,
No.
but a tapestry woven from genetics, temperament, life experiences, and personal choices.
Well said.
So what does all of this mean for us?
Right.
For our understanding of creativity,
Yeah.
of mental illness, and of the human experience as a whole?
Yeah, that's the big
What
question.
are we supposed to take away from all of this?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we need to move beyond simplistic notions
Okay.
of normal and abnormal.
Right.
Jamison challenges us to see mental illness not as a binary,
Yeah.
but as a spectrum,
Okay.
and to recognize that the very traits that can make someone vulnerable to suffering can also be the fuel for extraordinary achievements.
It's also a reminder that creativity itself
Yes.
isn't a singular phenomenon.
No, it's not.
It manifests in countless ways.
Absolutely.
And it's often born from the crucible of intense emotional experiences, both positive and negative,
Healthy.
and on a personal level.
Yeah. I think this book invites us to embrace our own unique temperaments,
does.
to explore the full spectrum of our emotions, and to find ways to channel those experiences into meaningful expression,
Right.
whatever form that might take.
Exactly.
I love that.
It's a powerful message.
Embracing our unique temperaments,
Yeah.
exploring our emotions,
Yeah.
and channeling them into meaningful expression.
Exactly.
It's a powerful message,
It is.
and one that resonates deeply with me.
I agree.
What about you?
Absolutely. It makes you want to dive deeper into the lives and works of these artists
Yeah.
to see how their struggles and triumphs might illuminate our own creative journeys.
And that's exactly what we're going to do in the final part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
We'll explore some more specific examples from Touch with Fire
Yeah.
and see what other insights Jamison has to offer.
Sounds great.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis.
Yes.
We've been on quite a journey
We have.
exploring this fascinating and complex link between creativity and mental illness
Yeah.
through Kay Redfield Jamison's Touch with Fire.
Such a good book.
In this final part of our deep dive,
Yes.
let's really bring this connection to life by delving into
Yeah.
some more specific examples of artists and writers who embody this idea.
I'm all for that.
Okay.
It's one thing to discuss these concepts in the abstract,
Yeah.
but seeing them play out in real lives is incredibly illuminating.
Right.
And Jamison is a master at weaving together biographical accounts, letters, journal entries,
Yeah.
even medical records to paint these multidimensional portraits that capture
Right.
both the brilliance and the struggles of these individuals.
Okay, so I know we talked about Lord Byron and Robert Schumann in the last part,
Yeah.
but you've got a whole section highlighted here about Vincent van Gogh.
Van Gogh. Yeah.
He's often held up as the quintessential example of the tortured artist.
He is.
What does Jamison's research reveal about him?
Well, Van Gogh's case is especially interesting because his artistic output was so closely tied to the fluctuations of his illness. His letters, particularly those written to his brother, Theo,
Yeah.
offer a window into his mind,
Mhm.
revealing the intensity of his experiences. He was incredibly prolific during his periods of hypomania,
Right.
often painting for hours on end, driven by a seemingly inexhaustible energy.
That's what always struck me about his work,
Yeah.
that sense of frenetic energy,
Yeah.
that feeling that the paint is almost exploding off the canvas.
Right.
Do you think those periods of hypomania were crucial to his artistic development?
Jamison certainly argues that they were.
Okay.
She describes how Van Gogh's hypomania fueled his intense focus,
Go ahead.
his bold use of color, and his almost mystical connection to nature.
Right.
But of course, there was a dark side as well.
Right.
His hypomanic episodes often gave way to crushing depression and ultimately to his tragic suicide.
It's a reminder that while we might admire the creative output of someone like Van Gogh,
Yeah.
we can't ignore the immense suffering that often accompanied it.
Absolutely.
His story is a stark reminder that mental illness is a serious condition, not something to be romanticized.
Right. Right. And Jamison is careful to balance her exploration of the potential benefits
Yeah.
of manic depressive temperament
Yeah.
with a clear-eyed acknowledgement of its destructive potential.
Right.
She doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of these conditions,
Right.
but she also highlights the resilience and strength of those who lived with them.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here?
Mhm.
Is there a definitive answer to the question of whether there's a link between creativity and mental illness?
I don't think there's a simple yes or no answer.
Right.
Jamison's work and all the sources we've explored point to a complex and nuanced relationship.
Yeah.
There's clearly a historical fascination with the idea of the mad genius,
Yeah.
and modern research suggests there might be some genetic and neurological underpinnings to this connection. But ultimately, each individual's experience is unique.
It's like what you said earlier.
Yeah.
It's a tapestry woven from threads of genetics, temperament, life experiences, and personal choices.
Right.
It's not about saying all creative people are mentally ill
Yeah.
or that all mentally ill people are creative.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the diversity of human experience and appreciating that what we sometimes label as illness can, in certain contexts, contribute to extraordinary achievements.
And perhaps most importantly, it's about approaching these topics with compassion and understanding,
Absolutely.
recognizing that mental illness is a real and often debilitating condition that deserves our attention and support.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From historical perspectives to modern research,
Mhm.
from ethical considerations to the personal stories of those who lived with the complexities of manic depressive illness.
And through it all, we've encountered this enduring question. What is the relationship between creativity and mental illness?
Yes.
We may not have found a definitive answer,
Right.
but I think we've gained a deeper understanding of the nuances and complexities involved.
Absolutely. And hopefully this conversation has sparked some new questions for you and encouraged you to continue exploring this fascinating topic.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Touch with Fire. We'll see you next time on the Mad Genius Thesis.